Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of The Muscle Makeover. I am your host, Megan Hardy, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Melissa Ambrose from MetaFitRx, which is a premier fitness and nutrition diagnostics lab here in Richmond, Virginia. So if you are local, go check them out. They offer DEXA body scans, RMR, and V02 Max testing to help you assess your metabolic health beyond the number on the scale, which you guys know, if you've been here a minute, how I feel about the scale. So it's not always your best indicator of progress. So they go way, way, way beyond that. So today I have Melissa joining me to talk more about metabolic health, and we'll be covering some hot topics like semaglutides, nutrition and reverse dieting protocols for any of you out there listening who might have been on, the yo-yo dieting cycle or under eating for a long time. And also we'll be covering sarcopenic obesity too. So Melissa is very, very knowledgeable in this space. She has her MS of exercise physiology from JMU, which is my alma mater too. Go Dukes.
Hey.
And she also is a clinical exercise. She's also a clinical exercise physiologist, master CPT, and the owner of MetaFitRx. So without further ado, welcome Melissa to the show.
Thank you. And again, thank you, Megan, so much for having me. Just a quick background on how I got started with MetaFitRx and how I got started doing what we do. So as you mentioned, I did my master's degree in clinical exercise physiology, and all of the testing that I do now is basically what I learned to do in graduate school. My professors were doing research. They did a lot of research on elite cyclists. And my goal with MetaFitRx was to bring all of that to kind of just the average person that wanted this data. Because if you're in the athletic realm, professional athletes are going to have access to this. If you're in a research facility, they're going to have access to this type of stuff. But just your average general person who wanted this data and kind of needs help fine-tuning what they're doing and cutting through all the noise, that was really my goal. It took me a really long time to get to this point, and I started doing resting metabolic rate and V02 Max first because I was actually the head of that department for a small boutique fitness studio, and I was in charge of all of their studios and teaching their instructors how to perform these metabolic assessments. And then when my husband and I moved here to the Richmond area is when we got the DEXA machine, and that was kind of our final piece for body composition, and we were really able to open up MetaFitRx and to offer everybody just that knowledge. The ability to come in and figure out your nutrition and your exercise really based on your metabolism and based on your individual body. So it's been an absolute dream come true. We've been open for about 2 years now, going on 3 years. And it's just been amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. And I love to, like, you said, like a lot of athletes or people in that space might have access to this testing, but you guys are trying to bring it to the general population of people who are just trying to improve their health.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Metabolism. It's awesome.
Yep.
Which is amazing. Could you give everyone, for anyone who's not familiar with what those tests are, could you just give kind of an overview of each of the tests that you guys run and do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the body composition is called a DEXA scan, and it's basically an X-ray of your body. And we look at bone tissue, lean mass tissue, and then body fat tissue. We're also able to differentiate between the difference between somebody's subcutaneous and visceral fat. So this is going to be the most accurate method of body composition. The machine has a very low error rate. Again, it is the gold standard, and it's also used in research facilities. The other two that we do, resting metabolic rate and V02 Max. So this is gas chamber analysis. We're looking at the ratios of oxygen to CO2 in your breath. And the resting metabolic rate tells us how many calories your body burns at rest in a 24-hour period. And this is basically considered your baseline metabolism, right? Do you have a fast metabolism? Do you have a slow metabolism? That's what we're testing. The V02 Max is a normative data standard for your cardiopulmonary health. So it's also just a longevity marker, right? How much oxygen can you take in and then also utilize during physical activity? And while that in itself is just a fantastic thing to know, we also provide your heart rate training zone. So during the V02 Max assessment, we get your anaerobic thresholds, we get your aerobic thresholds, and we put all that together to give you heart rate training zones and then to kind of pinpoint how and where you need to train for your goals.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm going to have to come back for the VO2 Max.
Yes, it's fun.
I knowingly have like not great lung capacity. So I'm like very curious what I would show up on there. So
it's I use the term fun loosely, but I
Yeah.
think it's fun. It's a good assessment.
It's fun depending on who you are. It's fun.
Exactly.
No, that's so good. No, one thing I wanted to mention too. So I just went and got a DEXA scan with them. And that was super fun and just very, very informative for me. And also thought it was hilarious because my bun showed up as muscle, even though you said anything above the skull doesn't count. It doesn't
Right.
count
Yeah.
that, but
It
I was
doesn't
like,
count.
that's really funny. My
We have that happen a lot.
I
Like
had a bun.
the machine will shut off. It'll beep at me because it's like, oh, you're outside of the scan zone, and it's somebody's hair that's just completely
Yeah.
sticking out. So yeah. So don't worry, that's not counted as lean mass.
My massive bun on top of my head. I also get flagged sometimes in the airport too when I go through the scanner. I've literally had someone squeeze my bun on top of my head because it flagged it. I was like, that's too
Yes.
funny.
It's a very dense bun.
Very dense bud. Yes. Sweet. Well, I would love to jump into one of our first topics of, first of all, I'm curious how you pronounce it because I've heard three different ways: semaglutides or semaglutides or semaglutides. I've also heard. So I have no idea if what's the correct pronunciation.
So, I wish I could settle that debate for you. You've
Yeah.
actually got one more than me. So I've only heard semaglutide and semaglutide, and I've heard both physicians and nurses say it both ways. So I think it's however we want to pronounce it.
However we want. Okay, cool. We can use both. But no, I would love for you to just start out in that space because I think that's such a hot topic right now, and just like all the weight loss drugs, like the Ozempics and like Wegovy's and all the things that are out right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love just to kind of pick apart your brain on that and what you know about it, what you would share with everyone, pros and cons, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best thing I can say about the semaglutide and these weight loss drugs for us in the fitness industry is it's here, right? It's
Yeah.
not going away. And I think as fitness professionals, we need to be very open-minded and open to working with these people that are on it. Because long story short, they need what everybody else needs on this drug. They still need proper nutrition. They still need weight training more than ever. What a lot of the research is showing is that people that are on these weight loss drugs are losing a lot of lean mass. Now, the pharmaceutical companies that distribute these weight loss drugs are quick to point out that when somebody's on a weight loss journey, they're going to lose lean mass. That's a pretty
Yeah.
normal occurrence, and rightfully so, right? They're not wrong. The clinically acceptable amount of lean mass loss is 30%, up to 30% of your weight loss. Personally, I think that is high.
Yeah.
I try to be like 15 to 20% of lean mass loss when we're talking to somebody who's on a weight loss journey, because the more muscle mass you can retain, that has a direct correlation to your metabolism. So again, up to 30% is acceptable, but we're seeing up to 40% with
Oof.
people 40% lean mass loss with people on these drugs. Now, depending on how much weight you had to lose, risk to reward, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
getting off the weight. If you have a lot of weight to lose, is getting that off. You might not care that there's 40% lean mass loss if it really is a drastic amount that's going to help with your total health. But if you've got somebody who's using the drug and maybe they don't have as much weight to lose, and a lot of that comes from lean mass, then we've got a problem, because again, you're just going to slow your metabolism down at that point. So I think the best we can do is learn how to work with it and educate people on resistance training, especially resistance training, and then keeping your protein intake up to help mitigate that lean mass loss. And I think a lot of people, there's almost like this stigma to it with the fitness industry. People like, oh, you're taking the easy way out, or they look at it as cheating, or just not willing to compromise, and like not willing to work with these people. And I definitely don't think that's the right approach. I think we should be helping people understand that if you ever want to get off this drug, you've got to build that lean mass. We've got to repair your metabolism. We've got to make sure that your lean mass doesn't fall too much during this process. So at first, when it first came about, I remember both my husband and I, our heads just kind of exploding, because we felt like eventually there was going to be this miracle drug that everybody just turned to. But now we're really starting to learn to work within that space and just really learn how to help people who are on it and make sure that they feel supported and that they do understand you still have to change your lifestyle, right? Semaglutide will work. It will
Yeah.
100% work. But if you want to get off of it, or if you get to a maintenance dose, you still have to change your lifestyle. So I really want us as fitness professionals to be open to that, and just be willing to help out and know that the lean mass loss is the big problem.
Yes, yes. And I love that you said the risk to reward part, because like to your point, if you have a excessive amount of weight to lose, the reward of losing the weight, even if some of that, a bulk of that is lean mass, may have more reward than risk. But oftentimes, a lot of people using it may have, 20 or 30 pounds to lose, and a good chunk of that might be lean mass that they're using, correct?
Yeah, that's when it becomes a little bit more dangerous because again, regardless of how you lose weight, whether it's on your own, whether it's through one of these weight loss drugs, you're most likely going to lose a little bit of lean mass. And even if you lost lost weight on your own, a perfectly healthy way, you're still going to
Yeah.
lose some lean mass. It just happens. So in turn, your metabolism is going to slow itself down to match your smaller body now, or to match that lower lean mass. And I think it's really important to educate people on either how to build that back up, or even that it's just happening. I don't think a lot of people even just know that it's happening, and they just assume that everything that's coming off is fat mass loss. So I think starting with education and then figuring out how to help implement a fitness and nutrition regimen when you're on it, because some of the side effects that I've seen can cause people to be very nauseous, very fatigued, and then a lot of people are just quite frankly, they're starving because they can't eat. They're so nauseous and so unable to eat that their caloric intake is so drastically low, which again is why the lean mass loss is happening. So I think just educating people on it, not necessarily trying to talk them out of it, but just trying to help them within their journey.
Yes. I know you mentioned in our consults this past week for my DEXA scan, but you mentioned something along the lines of like when you're losing the muscle mass and the weight, or if some of that is lean mass, what you're going to gain back if you're not setting the foundational principles of like the basics with lifestyle and nutrition and exercise, what you're going to gain back is not going to be lean mass that you're going to gain back. It's going to be
Correct.
fat mass in place of the prior lean mass that you
Right.
have.
So, and that's the same again, anytime somebody goes through a yo-yo cycle where they lose and gain weight, you lose weight, a part of that's lean mass. And then when you gain the weight back, you don't gain that lean mass back. And then you look at people that go through that cycle several times, and that's why their metabolism has slowed down, their lean mass has really diminished. And yeah, that can all play a direct role in your ability to maintain, because if now your muscle mass is lower, your what we call your resting metabolic rate, right, is lower, your metabolism's lower, you've reached your goals, life is great. Even if you go back to normal, that's now too much if you've slowed down your metabolism. So yeah, it can have drastic consequences. And just like anything else, once you stop it, if you didn't change your lifestyle, you're just going to go right back to where you were.
Yes. Yes. Well, actually, and speaking of that, that was another question I had for you, was along the lines of nutrition and reverse dieting, or, whatever that protocol would be. What would be the kind of some of your advice or tips for someone who needs to either rebuild or is losing, and to maintain the lean mass?
Yeah. So the reverse dieting and the reverse deficit dieting has kind of become a popular term. And it's great, right? We've all kind of heard the concept of, hey, eat more to lose weight, or, eat more to reach whatever your fitness goals are. How it's applied really depends on the situation that you're coming from. So if we're talking about somebody who's coming from the semaglutide situation where they lost some lean mass, you know, the idea here is we might have to build that metabolism back up. And that's true for a lot of people. So if you've lost lean mass, whether it was because you were on a weight loss drug, or you weren't, right? You just lost weight and you lost some lean mass. If you've slowed your metabolism down because you've always been on a diet, right? If you're someone who's always been in a calorie restrictive way of eating, and I'm just making these numbers up, but let's say you're always eating 1,200 calories. Well, that 1,200 calories is no longer a deficit for you. That's now the norm. And your body, your metabolism has slowed down to meet that. So what we find is, people that are on these weight loss journeys or these fat loss journeys, eventually everything plateaus and it just stalls out. And it's because you've got nowhere else to go. You can't just keep eating less. So the idea behind reverse deficit dieting is to build your metabolism back up so that we can create room for a deficit, because fat loss is math, like it or not, right? It's
Yeah.
calories in versus calories out, which is a completely different conversation because that is very nuanced. But at the end of the day,
Yes.
it really is math. So if you don't have that deficit to go in, you have to spend time repairing your metabolism. And that can be a very difficult conversation, especially when somebody's motivated and they want to lose weight, because you may or may not see weight loss or fat loss during this restore process. And I've seen it take anywhere from 3 to 8 or 9 months to really build that metabolism back up. So you have to get into the mindset of, I'm
Yeah.
repairing my damage, I'm repairing that metabolism so that I can get back to fat loss. While you're repairing that damage. So we've seen a lot of people go on these reverse deficit diets, just honestly, just kind of willy nilly, just like, okay, I'm just going to eat 2,500 calories. And then they come back and they're like, well, I gained 20 pounds.
Yeah.
That's not the effect that this should have. You should not gain weight on a reverse deficit diet. It should be done very, very slowly. Now, you might gain some water weight, right? We might have some fluctuations in water weight. And I always tell people, if you're gaining and losing 5 pounds in a day, that's not body fat. You can't physiologically gain or lose fat that fast. So
Yeah.
it's water weight. And it is normal to gain some water weight, especially as you start eating more, because your body is just going to hold on to a little bit more fluid, and that's fine. But you should not gain weight during this process. So typically what we do, obviously what I do is I assess somebody's metabolism, right? So I find that starting point. But if you don't have access to a resting metabolic rate, or you don't have access to these kind of tools, the best thing to do is just map out your diet for about a week or two and just see calorically where you're at. And you might be surprised to find that it's pretty low. And I always tell people, and again, I'm making these numbers up, but let's say you find out that you're only eating 12 or 1,300 calories a day. Start bumping that up very slowly. I like to say about 100 calories every 4 weeks, right? That's slow. That's an apple.
Very slow.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, it's super slow. And you could
Yeah.
bump it up faster, but again, a lot of it's a mindset with people. So the
Totally.
idea is to bump it up slowly, and eventually you're going to get to a point where you're eating more, and all of a sudden the scale is going to start losing again. And as long as you do it slow, you're not going to have weight gain. Now, the other caveat to this is you don't just get to eat more, you have to eat more and you have to lift weights, right? And that's what I scream at
Yes.
people all day long. It can't just be eating more, because then you will have that 20-pound weight gain that you weren't looking for.
Yeah.
Resistance training is so unbelievably important, because again, your muscle mass is directly tied to that metabolism. So in order to repair it, we've got to put some of that lean mass back on, or at the very least maintain the lean mass you have while we're trying to build. So I always tell people, if you track nothing else, we're tracking calories and we're tracking protein. Those are the two things that you got to have. Protein is definitely the magic macro, right? When it comes to weight loss and sustaining that muscle mass, or when it comes to reverse dieting and trying to build that muscle mass. But as long as you do it slowly, it should not have that effect of way too much weight gain too quickly.
So what you're saying is when you're increasing calories, don't do the Twinkie and ho-ho diet to increase
Right. Yeah.
calories.
Right.
And
And
to
it's,
get back up.
and I feel like so much of what we say is common sense, right?
Yeah.
But again, because of just that mindset, people think, oh, I can eat more. And all of a sudden it's 500 calories. And it's like, no, that was too much. You can't go from whatever 1,200, 1,300 to 2,000. You just can't make that jump right away. You can do it very slowly, and you can go faster than every 4 weeks. That's totally fine. As long as you're not gaining weight, you can start to increase it, and hopefully you feel better, right? You feel more energized. You're able to get through your workouts. Some of the things we look for, because people ask me, well, how do I know if this is working? And some of the things I tell people to look for is, first of all, your hunger cues, right? Are you getting hungry? Because that's your body's way of saying, hey, I need more fuel. And that's a good thing, right? The other
Mm-hmm.
big one that we talk about is your bowel movements, because I have met with people who, if they go to the bathroom like once a week or once every other week, and I'm like, that is a direct line to your metabolism right there. So if you start to see that that starts to increase, right? And all that is that means, hey, your body's taking what it needs and it's getting rid of the waste. That is the best way. That's like your best indication on a day-to-day basis as to how well your metabolism's working and it's firing up. And so those are the things I tell people. Watch for your hunger cues, right? Watch for your energy levels, watch for your bowel movement. You're going to know when it starts to feel better. And as long as that scale is not increasing in a negative way, right? A few pounds here and there, that's going to be expected, but you shouldn't have this massive weight gain on a reverse deficit diet.
So good. So good. And I love that you mentioned those like kind of the biofeedback markers like that, like your energy, your sleep, your bowel movements, like your gut health, like hunger cues, all of that. Cause I think a lot of people can get kind of also hung up in some of the data or metrics, and then they don't actually listen to their body at all. It's like that your body will
Right.
actually give you that feedback too. That can be really helpful if, let's say, if you don't have access to all of the labs or scans and things like that. But for someone who does and wants, more of those data and numbers and metrics, and that can be helpful and feedback and information too. How often would you suggest someone go in for something like a DEXA scan or some more labs?
Yeah, so typically once you've done a DEXA scan, I always tell people wait for there to be change before you come back
Yeah.
to do another scan, right? And depending on what you're working on, that could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. It could be a yearly thing if you're more of my maintenance. The only time I see people sooner than 3 months is if you have a rapid weight loss drop, and we want to make sure that it's not lean mass. But usually that 3 to 6 month mark is pretty good just to check in and make sure that everything's moving in the right direction. If you have access to a different method of body composition, so like bioelectrical impedance are very popular, lots of gyms have those. You can hop on those a lot sooner than you can come back and get on a DEXA scan. And that's a great way, to monitor change as well. It's not going to be as accurate as a DEXA scan, but it's still going to monitor change for you. So you can hop on that. Now, I would say don't do it too often because, the scale is going to go like this. Even if it's
Yeah.
going in the right direction, right? It's going to go up, down, up, down, up, down. So if it freaks you out, stay off of it. If you can understand and wrap your head around the fact that there's going to be fluctuations, that's completely normal. And then, you might be fine checking in, once a month. So the DEXA scan, we try to space out. Resting metabolic rate, if that's an assessment you get done, that usually only needs to be tested once, as long as you don't have any metabolic damage, right? So if you come in and your resting metabolic rate is right about where we think it should be or even higher, you're good to go. You usually don't have to retest that again, unless you came back and saw a lot of muscle mass loss, then we might want to retest it. But usually your metabolism stays pretty consistent unless you do something to slow it down. Right. So, and you often hear that our metabolism slows down with age, and that's actually not true at all. Our metabolism slows down as we age because as we age, we stop being as physically active. There goes the
Yes.
lean mass, there goes the metabolism. But if you are somebody who's working on a reverse deficit diet, then like I said, I would probably ask them to come back in around the 6 to 8 month mark and check and make sure that it's increasing the way we want it to. But like we talked about with those biomarkers, you can kind of tell on your own too that it's building back up. So how
Yeah.
often you have to redo these things is really up to you and really up to what you have access to and what your goals are. Ideally, though, we're getting everybody to intuitive eating, right? Intuitive eating should be what we're doing. We should be listening to our
Mm-hmm.
body. We should be listening to our hunger cues. I think, unfortunately, what's happened, especially with people that have slower metabolisms, we've overridden intuitive eating, right? We've
Mm-hmm.
completely ignored our intuition. We've now gotten to the state where, your body just knows it's not going to get fed.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't have hunger cues or, so there's a lot of people right now that do intuitive eating, and I think it's great. And that's always my goal, is to get them there. But a lot of times when you've had that damage, you kind of have to start with the science a little bit. And then our goal is to get them to, nobody wants to track forever. So the goal is to get them to a point where they can do intuitive eating.
Yes. But it's training or learning or intuitive eating, because it's like, oh yeah,
Right.
I'm intuitively eating. And then you find that someone's only eating 900 calories a day. And they're like, oh my gosh, I thought I was eating enough food,
Right.
but I guess not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So it's like
we see that
retraining,
a lot. Yeah. It's
and
amazing
it's
how
it.
much.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's amazing how much we do see that people are actually under eating, and that's part of the problem, or under fueling their performance. And they come in and they're like, I have no idea what's going on. like, well, I can tell you right now, you're only eating 1,300 calories. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, and oftentimes a lot of people too, and I know a lot of women who I work with are and are listening to this podcast, a lot of people oftentimes are even very cognizant of food and like aware of like eating clean, or, they're like, I eat very clean. I make good choices. And it's like, they're actually
Hmm.
very informed in a lot of those ways, but they still like might be under eating and not realize
Yeah.
it, and their body
Especially
not
if they're
knowing.
active, right? Especially
Yeah.
if you're active, because your RMR is just your baseline metabolism. If you add activity on that, that's a whole nother ball game. And when it comes to recommendations of like where you should be calorically, part of what we do is say, okay, first of all, assuming you don't have a slow metabolism, because that's like we just said, that's building it back up first. But if you don't have a slow metabolism, you can go up to 20% below your resting metabolic rate in order to help with fat loss. But I never recommend that for somebody who's active. I only recommend that to people who might be inactive for whatever reason. They had an injury, maybe they're brand new and they're not doing as much physical activity, they're just kind of slowly getting into it. But once you're active, that resting metabolic rate needs to be your do not go below number, because you've got to feed the
Yes.
metabolism, you've got to feed the body. And I've seen several people where I've done full panel assessments on them, all the assessments. And, all I can tell them is you are just not eating enough, especially because whatever physical activity they're doing, essentially their body is almost starving. Like it's looking for that fuel and they're just not getting it. And I think surprisingly, like you said, people do have a lot of knowledge. They are eating clean. They're trying to do their best. And they're just at the end of the day, not eating enough. And again, not eating enough, it might be 100 calories, it might be 200 calories. It doesn't have to be a drastic jump, but just little changes here and there can really make the difference to your body composition.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned, having someone come in who's losing or, has a significant weight loss goal or losing significant amount of weight. You'd want to make sure that it's the right kind of weight that they're
Mm-hmm.
losing, or, mostly, because we know some lean mass will go too.
Right.
But I would love for you to share too. You actually brought up in our consult this past week some examples, without, of course, naming any names or anything like that, of different types of clients or different types of lifestyles or diets that you've seen some patterns, and some, nothing concrete enough to be surefire data. But I would love if you have any examples to share of like some patterns or things that you've seen. And also talking, we can also touch on the sarcopenic obesity too, if you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, this is not research data, right? This is
Yeah.
just my own aggregated data from self reporting from people that come onto the machines. But we've seen some really interesting results. The first big one has been with keto, with the keto diet. So, we've seen people lose a lot of weight on keto, but just like with the semaglutide, it's going to be a lot of lean mass loss. Now, what happens, I'm very quick to say, you know what, great, congratulations, you've lost this weight. When people usually come in and they've lost weight on keto, or even any other diet, you're no longer weight loss, right? I have to shift their mind now to performance. And you're not going to be able to stay on keto and be a performance client, right? And shift your body composition, because maybe you still have 15, 20 pounds to lose, maybe 10, but now I need you to get some carbs back in there, and we need to focus on your resistance training, and we need to focus on performance. So it's about shifting their mindset, because you will lose weight on keto, but again, you're going to lose that lean mass. Now, what we've seen on the DEXA that's been a little alarming with keto has been the visceral fat. So we've seen people lose weight overall and lose some body fat overall, but the visceral fat seems to stay the same. The visceral fat being what's underneath the abdominal wall. And we had one participant come in, and he should not have been on keto anyway. Had I been able to get to him before this, we would have had the you need some carbohydrates discussion. But he came in, lost 15 pounds, and he wasn't necessarily overweight to begin with, but he was trying to lean out a little bit, and he lost about 15 pounds, and 10 of that was lean mass. And we finally got into the discussion, and I found out that he was basically only eating fat and only eating meat, and going on these very long distance runs and doing these obstacle course races. And we had to have the discussion where your body needs those carbohydrates in order to fuel this if you want to continue to maintain your lean mass and not lose anymore. So the keto diet, we've definitely seen a lot of lean mass loss and a lot of visceral fat stayed the same, which is not good, because if you're losing
Yeah.
fat, you're most likely wanting to lose that visceral fat as well. So that's been a trend that's been, again, interesting. It works for losing weight, but then once you get to that point where you're no longer weight loss and we're just looking at body recomposition, most people are not having the success they want when they come back for the DEXA scan. So that's been, hard for me sometimes, because anytime anybody comes back for a rescan, I'm holding my breath. I want them to be successful. I don't want to have to be the one to tell you that whatever it is you're doing is not working. And then, we have to have a discussion about why. But the keto one has definitely been the one that stands out to me, where when people are kind of coming back around, it's not necessarily the results they wanted to see. It's more lean mass than they wanted. And I don't think they were prepared for that. And a lot of times what people talk to me about, they're like, well, if you eat fat, you burn fat. And technically that's not wrong, right? Your body's going to burn what you eat, but that doesn't mean you're burning stored body fat. That's a whole other process. So, and I'm only picking on keto because that's been the popular one. I haven't really seen many other diets. We haven't had the DEXA scan that long. I think keto's been the most popular one right now that we've really seen. I would love to see, we're tracking semaglutide right now. So that one I'll have more aggregated data on in the future, but keto's really been the big one that we've seen a lot of people come in and track their body composition, again, just because it happens to be the most popular one right now.
Most popular diet right now out there, or one of them
right now.
Right now. Semaglutide's on its heels right now. About to replace. But also you had mentioned one woman that you had worked with who came in with really, 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 really low lean mass. Would you give that example or share that one? I think that one kind of goes into the sarcopenia.
Absolutely. Yep. So that's with the sarcopenic obesity. And we kind of define that as when you look at your BMI, right? Just the BMI scale, which is, again, a whole other topic, just normative data. But when somebody comes in on the BMI and their BMI says they're normal, right? Maybe I have a 5'6", height woman coming in at 145 or 150 pounds, and the BMI is like, you're good to go, you're normal. But they have clinically high levels of body fat and very little muscle mass. So on the outside, you look relatively normal, relatively healthy, again, especially with BMI standards. But on the inside, they have so low muscle mass that the majority of that is body fat. And that's sarcopenic obesity, right? Where you're coming in normal, but the actual composition is saying that you have way more fat. I mean, we're talking up to 40% or more body fat, somewhere between the 40 and 50% body fat, but they don't look that way. So we've seen that a couple times. And that one is very dangerous because sometimes that one is accompanied by low bone density. Sometimes it's not. But, then we really have to have the discussion about weightlifting and starting that routine, because in their mind, and again, this is one of those situations where I'm like, I have to explain it, because in their mind, they've always been told they're good to go. They go to the doctor, they do their height, they do their weight, BMI, you're healthy, have a nice day. And then they come and see us and we're like, oh my, no, like we really need to increase that lean mass, not even really decrease the body fat at that point is not even what I'm worried about. It's just getting that lean mass up, because lean mass is a longevity marker. And, doing all the things you need to do to increase the lean mass, that's going to help the body fat. But when we get a case like that, weight loss and body fat is secondary. Like, we really want you to come in and we really want you to lift. And, we're still in the day and age where lifting scares women. I got it last week where somebody said they don't want to bulk. And I'm like, my gosh, you have to understand what it takes to put on that kind of muscle. Like, it's not gonna, it's not gonna happen. That's not an accident. Like, don't worry, it's not gonna happen.
It's not gonna happen overnight.
Yes. And it really kind of blows my mind that that's still the stigma out there.
Yeah.
I kind of thought we were over that, but definitely not. I've gotten some of that just in the past week, but talking to them about lifting and having to do a progressive overload training, and don't worry, you're not on steroids. We're not doing any of that. This isn't bodybuilding. Like, we're just trying to increase for longevity and increase for your health. And the sarcopenic obesity one is scary because unless you go get a body composition done, you're not going to know. Yeah.
I can relate to that so much because I've back in college and a little bit post grad, but I was definitely more so like the quote unquote skinny fat, where like I would guarantee if I had done a DEXA or something, then it would have shown much higher body fat percentage for being quote unquote healthy standards on BMI charts or
Right.
standards for my height and weight, because I was able to maintain a quote unquote healthy weight. But I was like, I was not healthy though. First of all, my
Mm-hmm.
food choices and my relationship to food was not healthy. I was not healthy on the inside, but also I'm like my body fat percentage compared to lean mass guaranteed was so much higher. So I think that's such a huge differentiation, because I know a lot of women are just wanting to be healthy according to BMI standards, but I'm like, there's actually better standards to look at. And
Yeah.
then like to your point, getting lean mass, it's not just, yes, we're here for aesthetics too. Let's be real. A lot of us, like we like the aesthetics of lean muscle mass, but like it's also the health and longevity
Right.
marker, and such like a big player as far as your metabolism and keeping that fired up.
Yeah. Absolutely. And with the aesthetics, like you said, it's not a bad thing. That's
Yeah.
50% of why people come and they want to do this. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with wanting to look better, wanting to feel better. A lot of women, especially women, say tone, right? They want to get toned. And
Mhm.
and that's also leads into the conversation of, but I don't want to lift heavy, right? Like I want to get toned, but I don't want to get big. And so I always try to break it down. And, quick side note, when I was in graduate school, we actually were not allowed to say the word toned. Like that word was banned from us because
I love it.
because it doesn't mean anything. You can't
Yeah.
tone a muscle, right? It doesn't really mean anything. But to me, when somebody says tone, what they really want is muscular hypertrophy and body fat loss, right? They want to lose the fat and they want to see the muscle underneath, but you got to have the muscle underneath. And that's where, again, these programs where people are losing a lot of lean mass, because I've had several people come to me and say, yeah, I lost weight, but I'm still kind of squishy, or I'm still kind of skinny. Like I don't have the muscle that I thought I was going to have. And it's like, because you got to build it. It's not just there. And so that's what, and I tell, so whenever somebody says tone to me, whether or not I explain it to them depends on the person. But, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, you want to gain some muscle and you want to lose some body fat is exactly what you want to do. And you've got to pick up, you just have to pick up some weights to do it. And, you've met my husband, and it's so funny. He tells people all the time, I'm trying to get big. I lift heavy
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not that easy. Like your average person, look at every man in the gym. They're trying to get big. It's hard. Like, don't worry. It's not going to happen overnight. The amount of food you have to eat, the structured regimen you have to be on. I just think there's that disconnect of what we think
Mhm.
it takes to get something. And so we really push it as, yeah. And it took me a long time to say tone just because I wasn't allowed to say it, but that's what people understand, right? That's what they want to hear and that's what they understand. But at the end of the day, it's gaining that muscle mass. You've got to have a little bit of muscle mass in order to see it when you lose some weight.
100%. Yes. I only use toned in my content or messaging because it's what people know. But I feel like
Yeah,
I
I
always
do
have to
too. I do
I feel
too.
like I
Yeah.
always have to follow it up though with the caveat of like, this is what it actually is. It means building
Right.
muscle.
Yeah. Because your
um,
muscles can do one of two things. They can hypertrophy or they can atrophy, or they can stay the same. So I guess three things, but
three things.
toning, right. Yeah. So usually tone means hypertrophy. We want a little bit more muscle mass.
Yes. And if it was that easy, every guy would be on cloud nine if it was that
Yes.
easy to bulk up. It's not.
No, it's really
It's not
not.
that easy.
Mm-mm.
Yes.
No.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I do have one question for you, just to in leaving everyone with some tips here. What would be for someone who wants to like improve their overall, metabolic health, and also preserving that lean mass that we've been talking about, even if they are in a fat loss or weight loss phase, and not just lose weight, but lose the right kind of weight. Like, where would you tell them to start, or like what things would you have them be focusing on, whether they're in an active weight loss phase or not, just to preserve that lean muscle mass?
Yeah, so I think general recommendations, kind of how I said earlier, would be looking at your caloric intake as a whole and then your protein intake, right? If you're tracking nothing else, look at those two things. Because again, the calories you can play with and adjust to where you feel like, if fat loss or weight loss is a goal, you can adjust calories, but you got to keep that protein up. You got to keep that protein high. We work with a registered dietitian, so we've seen caloric intake from protein anywhere from 25 to 35%. I've seen it as high as 40% of your calories, but that's really only when we're talking about obesity and the muscle tissue kind of needing to be changed, like the muscle tissue not being in a very good state. But most people set your calories and then set your protein, right? And your protein should be somewhere between 25 and 35%. Now, that's high. You're not going to hit that by accident. So if
Yeah.
you're somebody who doesn't want to track, that's fine, but you've got to get a handle on that protein intake. You really do. And that would be my first suggestion: calories and protein. Make those two the things that you focus on. As far
Perfect.
as your fitness, when we're talking about just overall health and longevity, right? Make that come first. And then how you look and the fat loss is secondary, but it's going to happen. But if you really
Mm-hmm.
focus on the longevity aspect, we're talking about resistance training at least 3 times a week if you can only hit total body, right? If you've only got 3 times a week to weight lift, 3 times a week total body, right? Hit the muscles as often as you can. If you've got more days that you can consistently do weightlifting, then we can start splitting it up, right? Then you can start talking about upper body days or lower body days or push pull splits. But it all really depends on what is your schedule like? What are you realistically going to stick to? Because consistency is the key. If you split everything up,
Yes.
you only stick to it for 2 weeks, it's not going to do anything for you. So find a routine that you can stick with. And if you don't have that often to lift, if it's only 2 to 3 times a week, make it total body, right? Get in there and hit
Yes.
everything. As far as cardiopulmonary health, right? Cardiovascular health, a lot of people use cardio for weight loss. And I am not a fan of that because cardio for weight loss, it'll work, it'll expedite the process. But if you do 5 days a week of cardio, you don't ever get to stop. You have to
Yeah.
always do 5 days a week of cardio. So I tell people, do cardio for your cardiopulmonary health. Find a routine that you enjoy and that you're going to stick with. And typically for most people, that should be around 2 to 3 times a week. One high intensity, one low intensity, right? Mix it up a little bit, work the different energy systems, but don't bank on cardio for your fat loss or for your weight loss, because the minute you stop, your body's going to compensate. So do cardio for your cardio health, focus on weightlifting and nutrition for your fat loss and your body recomposition.
So good. So, so good. I love that you ended with that. Do cardio for cardiovascular health.
Yes.
So good.
And I know because I've been there. I've done
Yeah.
cardio for weight loss when I did fitness competitions. And then when you're done, like I don't want to do cardio anymore. And then all of
Yeah.
that weight just comes back. So
Comes
yeah,
right
I
back.
learned a long time ago, do cardio for your cardiopulmonary health.
So good. So, so good. Well, Melissa, where can everyone find you?
So we're, like you said, we're located in Richmond. We are a small business. It's MetaFitRx. We're at 5901 West Broad Street. I believe it's considered Midtown. We're kind of right above Willow Lawn. And you can check out all of our stuff online. We're at www.metafitrx.com.
Awesome. Awesome. And I will link that in the show notes as well as your social media handles so everyone can check you guys
Awesome.
out. But thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Megan. This was fun.
Absolutely.